set it up here out of my way. There we go. All right. So, yeah, thank you for mentioning the Paul Williams, and welcome to a new week, the 13th. We've got one more week to go. See how many fireworks we can get in between now and then. And I do want to let you know that we placed the shirt order this morning. So we should have them in a couple of days, then we'll begin sending them out. And I did want to give kudos to, we had the farthest away order, which he couldn't actually do it in the system. We're going to do it outside of the system. Hold on, just, I don't know how he pronounces his first name. It's Tone. So I'm going to say it's Tony. And let me find out exactly. Here he is. He is from Norway. So yeah, he said he had to have a shirt. So we're going to figure out how to send him a shirt. And figure out how to get him to pay for it somehow, some way. So anyway, we'll figure it out. And we went ahead and submitted the next design. And as soon as she gets it in a format that I can send to you guys, I will let you guys see what that looks like. But you guys have been amazing as far as those shirts go. Blew me away, actually. So anyway, all right, let's see. We were in chapter 8, and we had just been talking about the archipelago, the Sukarno, all of the whole Indonesia initial, not the actual coup. That'll come later because that was in 1960s. We're only up to the 1950s at this point. So that's kind of where we left off. So the author goes on to say that what happened next in Washington had less to do with Indonesia than the president's desire to fine-tune his staff organization. Eisenhower was mad about the fiasco that had happened in Indonesia and its blatant, he was more concerned, not about, obviously he authorized it, but how badly they executed it. Because keep in mind, this guy is, at the end of the day, he's a general. He did these type of operations during World War II and before. So he knows exactly what it takes to get them done. And he was very disappointed they weren't able to get it done. Okay. So there needs to be some changes. The changes would begin with the 5412 group. Now, remember, the 5412-2 memo is the memo that gave the CIA the ability to basically just go anywhere, kill anything, and do whatever they want. Supposedly with plausible deniability from the president, which means there will never be any documentation that the president directed them to do that because the whole thing is set up on plausible deniability. So basically, you have an organization that was created, given a blank check by the use of drug trafficking and weapons trafficking, given the rubber stamp of national security, and was able to go and do whatever they wanted. And there's zero accountability on purpose because they don't want it to be able to be tracked back to the president. Let's see. They also had plans to do something with the Directorate of Plans in the CIA because they ultimately were the ones that failed. A major source of the proposals was the President's Board of Consultants on Foreign Intelligence Activities, which, of course, now is the President's Intelligence Board. And it was also known back in the day as the Hull Board, Hull. That was named after General John E. Hull, Hull. The board consisted of a group of Americans chosen by the president who met monthly in Washington and were briefed by intelligence agencies and basically did a report out to the president once or twice a year. Eisenhower had established the board in 1956 to head off any initiative that would have created a joint congressional committee for intelligence oversight. Because again, they don't want anybody looking at what they're doing. At its first meeting, the members of the Intelligence Board endured a briefing of 8 hours by the CIA, packed with details and intelligence reporting about covert operations. Lyman Kirkpatrick, the Inspector General of the CIA, who had responsibility for all dealings with the board, recalled that first briefing was a brutal one. He wrote that, quote, it was in truth a saturation effort, unquote. Later, as the arrangement became more routine, there was time for reflection. The Intelligence Board developed its own recommendations for President Eisenhower. The board began to argue in December 1956 that the approvals for CIA Cold War activities were made by extremely informal and somewhat exclusive methods. Yeah, no kidding. Moreover, projects came almost too exclusively for the responsibility of the Central Intelligence Agency alone. The board felt that the State Department and Defense Department should have a closer coordination along with ambassadors in the different areas. By 1958, the Hull Board had developed additional views expressed in their report on October 30th, 1958. And they personally presented it to the president on December 16th. The spokesperson for the board was General Hull. He made covert operations the second highest priority on his list of topics. He pointed out that the initial evaluations of proposals were made by a staff within the Directorate of Plans and objected that, quote, it is undesirable for a group of this type to have responsibility for evaluating its own work, unquote. No shit, Sherlock. The CIA did act on this administrative question. Lyman Kirkpatrick and the new director of plans, Bissell, instituted a broad inquiry on the mission. By February 59, the internal inspection and review staff had been abolished. Still, Allen Dulles argued in a memo submitted the following February that the CIA took into account all available intelligence before beginning any operation, that the agency was always on guard against self-serving intelligence, bullshit, and the Hull Board had an exaggerated idea of the autonomy enjoyed by the Plans Directorate. No, they didn't. The last argument is interesting in that the Intelligence Board members one of them was Jimmy Doolittle. And you remember where he fell into this whole thing, who had expressly studied covert operations for Eisenhower back in 1954 and came up with the whole shitty mess. Remember William Pauley, that whole thing? Yeah, they're the ones that created or created the whole idea of what's going on. And the CIA's saying that the people that are on the board, one of which is Doolittle, don't know what they're doing. In fact, executive council was a more important issue than ever. Rather than shrinking after the Korean War, the plans directorate grew. From between 53 and 61, 8 years, it added 1,000 people directly to their staff, like as civil service. they also were consuming 54% of the entire CIA budget, which doesn't include all of the off-books money. In 58, there was also 7,000 military personnel outside of the CIA giving direct support to the CIA. Such operations as what happened in Indonesia required a high degree of coordination between the military and the CIA, making the nature of this formal relationship an important matter. The Pentagon and CIA link ran through the 5412 group, the staff of which is provided by the CIA. One proposal backed by the Hull Board in 58 was to substitute a joint staff with representatives from the Pentagon and state at the December meeting. President Eisenhower made clear his view that the 5412 group should meet as a court with minimum staff assistance from their own agencies. Everything depended on this group. One man working for the president made the 5412 group his special concern. That guy's name was Gordon Gray. Gray. Gray had once hoped to become the director of Central Intelligence, but any chance he had expired with the Truman administration. He was a holdover on as a board member and helped provide advice. Gray's efficiency and discretion also pleased the president when he was brought in to run the Office of Defense Mobilization. When Robert Cutler, Ike's special assistant for national security affairs, left the White House to return to his Boston bank, the president turned to Gray, though a Democrat, to fill this important post, because parties really don't matter at the end of the day. Gordon Gray was finally catapulted over the DCI. Now he would help Eisenhower run the CIA. As the president's special assistant, Gordon Gray was Eisenhower's representative on the 5412 group. And remember, that was set up so that Eisenhower has plausible deniability. So this Gordon Gray, who's a Democrat, Eisenhower's a Republican, is going to be the one basically approving and disapproving under the guise that he knows what the president wants. He spent most of 58 observing the CIA's oversight in action. Though the DCI was officially only an advisor to the group, Gray found that the committee exercised virtually no initiative, which left the field largely open to Allen Dulles. The special assistant raised his doubts openly at the December meeting with Hall and Doolittle, and was then assigned to study the entire relationship between the 5412 group and the CIA with an eye towards revising the 5412-2 memo. After Christmas, Eisenhower met directly with Dulles and Gray. Eisenhower laid great stress on his arrangements for executive management of intelligence and clandestine operations with the Hall Board and the 5412 group, both of which reported directly to him. The system had to be made to work because it was intended to thwart any effort by Congress to provide oversight to covert operations. Allen Dulles, no doubt, made appropriately conciliatory comments, but Gordon Gray was not satisfied. The semi-annual 5412 review for the president was presented May 15, 1959. 4 days later, Gray sent a memo to Allen Dulles, the Secretary of State and the Pentagon rep on the 5412 group, which he said they were labeled as his random thoughts. But Gray's criticism was not random at all. They included the following issues. Only 4 or 5 of the items covered in the review had been discussed in any group meeting thus far. A better understanding of the mission of the group was necessary. Quote, the criteria with respect to what matters shall come before the group are ill-defined and fuzzy. The committee needed to develop procedures to evaluate operations in addition to approving them, and quote, I strongly believe the president would expect some initiative, unquote, from the group. Like, make shit up, let's get going. We got operations, we got countries to overthrow. Eisenhower agreed. In an effort to force the 5412 to deal with these problems, on December 26, 1958, the president requested that the group hold regular weekly meetings in place of the occasional ones. The problems nonetheless persisted. When Gray gave one of his regular briefings to Eisenhower somewhat later, like around June 1959, the president then referred to one particular activity which he was disturbed about, but said that he assumed it had been approved by the group. Gray, reported that it had not been approved by the group within the last 11 months. See, they don't know what the hell's going on because nobody, the whole plausible deniability means nobody by design knows what the hell's going on. Finally, the relations between the Pentagon and CIA were continuing to be controversial. The CIA actually dealt with three different parts of the Pentagon: the international affairs, security affairs, represented the SecDef. The Joint Chiefs of Staff provided military input, while direct coordination with the joint execution as well as military cover support was in the hands of the Assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Special Operations. So you've got a special ops guy, the highest guy at the Pentagon. You have a Joint Chiefs of Staff guy, and you have a guy for international security affairs. And the international security affairs is normally the people that coordinate, like the Marine embassy kind of things, from the SecDef's perspective. Throughout the Eisenhower period, the officer was Marine Lieutenant General Graves Erskine. You spell his name Erskine. He worked basically directly for the SecDef, which at the time was Neil McElroy. McElroy's successor, Thomas S. Gates Jr., took office December 1959 and served throughout the remainder of Eisenhower's administration. He had been a Naval Reserve officer in Iwo Jima in 1955 when Graves Erskine had commanded the 3rd Marine Division. Gates too allowed total freedom of action for the Secretary of Special Operations. Erskine also had direct access to Eisenhower. The Hall Board criticized the many different facets of the Pentagon's involvement in this group and raised the possibility that they needed one single point of contact. Eisenhower said that this was letting the military into political matters, while letting the 5412 group get into the actual implementation of covert operations, and that would be a mistake. So in effect, Ike defended his existing command arrangements for covert actions because they were basically they weren't functioning, and any formalization of this process would by design set up paperwork, and that's the last thing they want. They want no documentation. Eisenhower continued to wrestle with the dilemma of control versus security and plausible deniability. The problem was difficult, and Ike could not ultimately solve it, though failures like those in Syria and Indonesia spurred him on, as did the reoccurring political pressure for congressional oversight mechanisms in the intelligence field. But the 5412 group could not seem to exercise initiative. There was no one really to question covert operations, so long as policymakers shared a belief in the efficacy of Cold War operations. Approvals would be secured easily because all you had to do was say, I thought I had approval. We brought it up because no one's actually approving them because they don't want to do it in writing. So, Chapter 9 starts off the war for the roof of the world. And I think, let me see how long this is. I think probably it's a good long chapter. So I want to get started on it, and that way we can finish it up tomorrow. So this one starts off in the foothills of the Himalaya in India, and it basically is in the area of Nepal and India. And it says this area was so remote that it was virtually unknown to outsiders. Tourists who came to see the mountains could visit the Nepal capital if they ventured near, and I'm going to mess this up, but it's spelled Kalimpong, Kalimpong. It was usually to see like a relative or something. They didn't get very many outside visitors. So it was under the guise of a tourist that an American came to Kalimpong in the spring of 1955. The man was not what he seemed, but an unnamed official of an unnamed U.S. government agency. Gosh, I wonder which one that could be. Indeed, perhaps Kalimpong was not what it appeared either. For several years already, the village had been at the center of a dispute between India and the People's Republic of China. Peking complained repeatedly that Kalimpong was being utilized as a base to foment Chinese terrorists, basically, like they were using it as a base to project, just like they did in Korea and Vietnam. What would ever give them that idea? And all the islands around China. So they kept complaining that somebody was using that city in India to attack China. The Indian Prime Minister Nehru did tell the Indian Parliament as early as September 1953. Now, keep in mind, this is right at the end of the Korean War, 53, that the Kalimpong was a nest of spies. Agents came from every country, said the prime minister. Sometimes I begin to doubt whether the greater part of the population is not foreign spies altogether. So evidently, and I'm just fascinated by the continued, they don't even miss a beat. And keep in mind, the whole purpose of this was to keep attacking at the edges of China to find a way in to insert Chiang Kai-shek back into China, primarily for the opium, but they sold it as to defeat communism. The American who came in 1955 may have been a diplomat, but he was most assuredly a spy. He is not further identified by the man who tells the story, his name is George Patterson. He was a Scottish missionary who had worked in eastern Tibet, spoke the language, wrote several books about the country, and resided in Kalimpong. Patterson was one of a small group of Westerners who knew anything about Tibet. He was well known in the Tibetan political circles, including the Dalai Lama. As Patterson tells the story, the American came to him. It was not the first time. The previous year, an Indian intelligence official had also appeared, asking Patterson if he could contact prominent Tibetans willing to discuss resistance in China. It was exactly for such contact that the American came. Patterson acted as a translator. The Tibetan had outlined his difficulties for the Indian official, much as he now did for the American. The American expressed sympathy, but stressed the problem inherently in supplying people or equipment over the mountains, and said cooperation with the Indian government was essential. According to Patterson, the American went on to draw up a 10-year assistance plan designed to overthrow China after the first 5 years. The Americans said that special U.S. agents would be appointed who had no contact with the embassy, but would be there to handle the Tibetan affairs. Tibet was another of those situations in which secret warriors were able to use the local resistance movement to America's advantage. The resistance sprang up as Mao attempted to consolidate his rule. Traditionally conservative, the Tibetans were both politically and culturally distinct from the lowland or Han Chinese, of whom the communists were only the latest political shadings. Although Tibet had served for several centuries as a Chinese vassal state, the reins had always been loose since the fall of the Manchu dynasty in 1911. This had permitted the emergence of warlords in China, local chief with powers similar to the Dalai Lama in Tibet. In addition, India lay immediately to the south of Tibet, leading to certain competition for influences in the region. To some degree, Tibetans were able to play the powers against each other in an effort to preserve as much of their independence as possible. The tragedy for Tibetans' independence lay in the relative strength of the Chinese communists and nationalists, which is Mao and Chiang Kai-shek. Whereas Chiang Kai-shek lacked the power to be more than a first among equals, Mao's movement was unified and also more determined to impose central control. The new Mandarins had a program, tremendous energy, and the People's Liberation Army. There were ultimately no way the lowlanders could have kept out the Mao's forces if they were to come. Tibet was hardly prepared for modernization. The roof of the world was a land of monasteries, over 3,000 of them, nomads, small towns, and ruled by a hierarchy of monks. The Dalai Lama was nothing less than the Godhead, the incarnation of Buddha, chosen as a child by wise monks after test. Signs in the area were ominous. A sacred object, a gilded wooded dragon, began to drip water from its mouth. The Chinese Mao's forces was known to be approaching. Then in the summer of 1950, to Tibet itself. A belated effort to create an effective army with military aid from India never had the time to succeed. Now, keep in mind that we've already read, and from several different sources, that Mao was never interested in excuse me. I had to sneeze. Sorry. Mao had stated several times that he was not interested in discontinuing the Tibetan autonomy. But the West wants to use Tibet as a wedge into China, just like they use Korea and just like they use Vietnam. So there was friction developing, and there were Western people camping out ready to take advantage of the friction. So one of the difficulties for everyone in that area is a lack of communication. There were no railroads, roads, airstrips, and basically no centralized economy. Everybody was kind of like off in their own villages. So obviously, militarily, one of the ways that you control people is by controlling food and stuff like that, but there's no centralization at all in Tibet at the time. So there's not a lot of military advantage or control when you have an economy set up like that, which, by the way, is why they try to centralize everything so they can control us. That's the reason why you had all of the small farms bought up to make big farms, because you have less people you have to control in order to control everybody else. They don't want you to be independent. So in 1953, Chinese road surveyors began to talk reform with the Tibetan governor. And he basically ended up resigning because he couldn't find any support throughout Tibet, because the Western people had already began sowing seeds of discontent among the Tibetans. The following year, when the Chinese began to establish cooperative farms in the area, fighting began with the locals. Early in 1955, the Chinese arrested a Lobsang Sangwang, who was one of the tribal leaders in Tibet, who had spoken out against the new maneuvers from the communists. It sparked several uprisings and demonstrations. When a unit of 200 PLA troops arrived to restore order in the mountainous area, the tribesmen captured and disarmed them, cut off their noses, then sent them back home as a warning. The Goloks, G-O-L-O-K-S, joined forces with a chief of over 100,000 families who had been fighting for several years already. The PLA responded by sending large detachments to eastern Tibet. One force of 3 regiments met and was defeated by the united rebels. The Chinese situation was growing worse, and the PLA had threatened the livelihood of several of the different tribes by levying taxes and traders on traders. It was said that one of the monasteries with 5,000 monks and 113 satellite monasteries literally thrived on such trade and smuggling. Fearing the worst, the PLA garrison had tried to disarm the populace, but were themselves overwhelmed instead. Even at Batang, a town known for the Tibetan collaborators, the people rose up against the lowland Chinese. Partisans managed to block the road at 3 different points. So at least 2 of the provinces, the Chinese attempted to split off from Tibet by incorporating them into their neighboring Chinese provinces. But by 1956, unrest was spreading and was affecting the Dalai Lama, who had previously tried cooperating by creating a commission to oversee the integration of them into China. So it happened in 1956 with a special occasion of Buddhism, the 2,500th year since the birth of Buddha, marked a celebration in India. The Dalai Lama naturally attended, bringing with him 500 persons in his immediate party, along with 150 monks. Once in India, the Tibetan leader asked Nehru for political asylum. Nehru informed the Chinese of this development, and the communist foreign minister, Chow En-lai, made a sudden visit to India, where he met secretly with the Dalai Lama, who was convinced to return to Tibet only by promises of changes in Chinese policy. Such changes as did occur were merely cosmetic, leaving the Dalai Lama virtually a prisoner in his monastery. So, George Patterson's story is only one version of the origins of the CIA paramilitary operation in Tibet, because, as I mentioned, there are other versions of it. Another account has it that the activity was simply an expansion of an espionage network set up by the Dalai Lama's second eldest brother, Gyalo Thondrop, based in Darjeeling, where Throndrop lived. The Tibetan network supposedly had had connections with the CIA since 51. The meetings at which Patterson interpreted may have represented the CIA's final decision to deal itself a hand in Tibet. So both versions could also be correct. It is impossible to know all of the details. The appropriate records remain classified. Why would that be? It's not for the courts. In fact, the entire discussion of Tibet in a book called The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence would have been deleted by the agency's censors. Tibet is buried in the lore of the CIA as one of the successes that are not talked about, according to Fletcher Prouty, the Air Force colonel who worked with General Erskine's Office of Special Operations. He was the Joint Chiefs of Staff in that trio of people that you work with, that we were just talking about. This reluctance to discuss Tibet is undoubtedly related to the subsequent involvement of the U.S. relations in China. Of course it is. Today, it is thought indelicate to draw attention to the explicit paramilitary effort to stir up trouble for that very nation. Refusal to open the records on Tibet is ironic. Given the many failures that pepper the CIA's paramilitary, you would think that that one that supposedly turned out just fine would be one of their bragging rights. But that's the reason why we're now convinced you're not going to hear about Tibet. You're not going to hear about what really happened in Korea. You're not going to really hear about what happened in Vietnam. And you're not going to hear about the real origins of Taiwan, because they're all attacks by us against China, not the other way around. Developments in the rebellion suggest that the beginning of the effective cooperation between the CIA and partisans dated from the mid-1950s. That February, simultaneous attacks occurred at several points in eastern Tibet, so widely separated that coordination seems clearly to have been necessary given the terrain. More pointedly, in a revealing cultural change, beginning in 1956, clothing made of parachute material began to appear throughout Tibet, basically replacing cotton as a fabric. The new airdrop is said to have occurred, the first airdrop, in 1956, south of Bataan, on a drop zone lit by flares carried out by a plane that flew over Burma in order to reach Tibet. In addition, in 1956, the American Society for Free Asia, which basically is the CIA front, the ostensibly private lobby group, had been set up with the CIA's help, sponsored a U.S. lecture tour with the Dalai Lama's eldest brother, speaking in support of a rebellion just before there was a rebellion. Imagine that. Complementing airdrops with CIA training, recruits often took a month to negotiate the trails down to India, and the Pengda brothers had made a fortune using those same trails during World War II to smuggle arms to Chiang Kai-shek. They had a very well-established support network, including a warehouse that was now reopened. Recruits traveled in groups to Calcutta by train, when the next link was a contact address. Chartered planes would then flew the recruits to Taiwan, with a refueling stop in Bangkok or Hong Kong, where the planes remained with blinds down. In camp, the recruits were shown a new world, a world of sophisticated weapons and communications unknown to Tibet at the time. The Tibetans became very proficient soldiers. Their cavalry was universally feared by the PLA, yet the Tibetan language had no word for cavalry. Skilled horsemen, the Tibetans had 30 different words for parts of the horse harness, but none for the harness as a whole. The language had different words for specifics, but none for different types of trees. They had them all, but they didn't have a generic name for a tree. You just had to call it by its right name. There are scores of terms for trance and meditation, but none for sleep. The new military objects Tibetans were encountering led the word skyboat for airplane and sky cloth for parachutes. Some recruits transcended their lack of experience with Western technology to become radio specialists. Others became weapons experts for the drop zones. On Taiwan, the recruits were eventually divided into 3 groups: one to retrace its steps to Tibet and become unit leaders with the partisans, one to remain in the training camp as instructors and translators, and the last group selected for special missions given further training. The special mission training during the early years were given on another island, very probably Saipan, or you remember because Chiang Kai-shek actually conquered several of the outer islands around China. And those Latin American people that were sent to the political warfare cadre academy on Taiwan also went on to further training on other Pacific islands. The initial training on Taiwan squarely places the Tibetan operation within the larger framework of an attack on the People's Republic of China. Taiwan was a very early player in the CIA station there. Its importance was reemphasized after the Taiwan Straits crisis in 1954 and was reemphasized after the, in 1958. Chiang Kai-shek still nursed his dream of a return to the mainland to attack Mao. During the 1958 crisis, Rear Admiral Roland Smoot, S-M-O-O-T, commander of the U.S. military mission on Taiwan, was taken to see Chinese nationalist training of special forces, some 5,000 of them. Chiang Kai-ku, which is Chiang's son and deputy for intelligence matters, described an ambitious plan to land special forces all along the coast of China. While the Americans refused assistance for that, they did support everything else, like the boats, the airplanes, and everything else. They just said they weren't going to be in the party. The CIA station from early 1958 to June 62 was under Ray Klein, who became a close personal friend of Chiang Kai-ku's through his CIA presence there, and also with the Nationalist Special Forces, and became a joint agent in propaganda activities. The use of agents was largely replaced in about 1960 with overhead reconnaissance. Nationalist pilots were trained to fly U-2s given to Taiwan under a military assistance program. Think about that for just a second. The U.S. gave a dictator, the #1 drug trafficker in the world, Chiang Kai-shek, U-2 airplanes for reconnaissance over mainland China. The photographic evidence came back to the CIA for interpretation. Though the rebellion was confined to eastern Tibet in its early years, Chinese actions in 1956 virtually ensured that it would spread more widely. One of these was the reduction of the Litang Monastery. In late February, during the 3rd week of a Tibetan New Year celebration, the PLA forces suddenly surrounded and sieged the monastery. Litang was crowded with about 400 monks. 2,000 more were in for the celebrations, and 2,000 were merchants and townspeople. The Chinese besieged the place for 64 days, culminating in a strike by Chinese jet bombers, the first use of such against Tibet. The group of Tibetans charged the PLA lines and broke through. About 1,600 got away, and 2,000 more escaped that night. The next day, the PLA occupied Litang. Many of the prisoners they captured would be cruelly put to death. It was the beginning of the Chinese scorched earth strategy designed to break the power of the resistance in Taiwan who basically at this point is in bed with the West. The PLA action that proved counterproductive came that summer when the PLA commander attempted to coerce over 200 Tibetan leaders to agree to the Chinese social reforms. The Tibetans refused, escaped, and had little alternative but to join the resistance. This provided CIA recruiters with a whole new pool of prospects to recruit. For the Chinese communists, the Tibetan War was a conflict for roads. In the early years, the roads were the substance as well as a symbol of the arrival of Mao's party in Tibet. The roads were defended by surveillance and maintenance stations at 20-mile intervals. Just manning this system of posts required 40,000 PLA troops and half the number of local militia. Because the roads were the only Han lifeline, they controlled the military capability of the PLA. These roads quickly became the main target for the CIA-trained Tibetan paramilitary. By 1957, it was estimated that 80,000 Tibetans were fighting with the main partisan group, with another 10,000 bandits. One of Chow Enlai's promise to the Dalai Lama in India had been Chinese withdrawal from Tibet. Some party cadres were pulled out, but many more Han specialists and farmers were resettled in Tibet during a colonialization program. The most significant withdrawal was the PLA, which removed most of its forces from central Tibet, but instead of transporting them to China proper, committed the units as reinforcements in the outlying areas. Soon the PLA had some 14 divisions combating the partisans. The supply system was strengthened by opening the Lhasa of a major truck maintenance shop in 1957. Again, just to show the hypocrisy here. So Mao is relocating mainland Chinese into the Tibetan province, no doubt as spies to inform on their neighbor. But remember the story of the Catholic Church helping the CIA relocate 1 million Northern Vietnamese that had never been out of their village into the South to do exactly that same thing. I just find the hypocrisy of us doing something and we couch it as the right thing to do, while at the same time criticize, but we never even acknowledge we're doing it, because most people, if you talk to them on the streets today, would never even know the 1 million person forced migration to the South from people in the North prior to the Vietnam War. They don't know anything about it. So our use of those tactics is hidden from us, while at the same time we criticize the other entities, and both of them are wrong. I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong. Both of them is wrong. I just want to ensure that everybody understands the irony of what's going on here. Our wrong is hidden from us, so we don't know. And then they focus on that same exact wrong on somebody else, and we get enraged by it. Not even these measures stemmed the success of the partisans, who by 1958 claimed to have ejected the Han Chinese from all southeastern Tibet. The partisan leaders visiting Kalampong reported that 40,000 PLA soldiers had been killed in the battle since 1956. In central Tibet, a partisan unit under Amdu Lashe, which reportedly had received some of the earliest airdrops of weapons and radios and training, had fought in that district and essentially kept clear the pack trail that they needed to resupply. Warfare brought about splits in Tibetan society. There was also moral problems for traditional non-violent Buddhist Tibetans choosing to war against the Hans. The PLA helped resolve these problems by bombing monasteries beginning in Latang in 1956. Ultimately, even the monks took sides. The Tibetan second religious leader, went with the Chinese, eventually to become the Chinese recognized religious leader of the country. But most of the lamas took the rebel side. This was the case with the Dupang Monastery, one of Tibet's largest, with 700 subsidiaries, which sheltered a delegation from Kham after one of the major sieges on the city. I saw rebel weapons, guns, and rifles come in by night, night after night, said one of the locals. For the Americans, getting those cases of weapons into Tibet became much easier in 1956. At the time of the Hungarian crisis, Eisenhower had remarked that the nation was inaccessible as Tibet, and Eisenhower was right. At the time, the U.S. lacked long-range transport aircraft capable of carrying heavy payloads. By December 1956, the C-130 was produced by Lockheed and began to join the U.S. Air Force inventory, and that, more than anything else, made the expansion of all of these secret wars, both in Tibet and elsewhere, doable. This remarkable plane had the range to make the extended flights more than 2,400 miles flying from Bangkok and still carry significant loads up to 22 tons in a C-130E. The Civil Air Transport did not own any C-130s at the time and is not known to have leased any of those before March of 1959 during the reorganization where they came out as Air America. Among the 200 missions over the Chinese mainland carried out in 1961, it is credited with flights to Tibet, but this very probable is in the four-engine C-54, not the C-130. Such C-130s as flew in the Far East belonged to the Air Force's 315th Air Division based in Korea and Okinawa. Their use was controlled by General Erskine's office in Washington. Clandestine work did consume Air Force resources, but only for Tibet, not only for Tibet, but for Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. The Air Force was clearly responding to this workload when March 1961 on Okinawa, it established E-Flight within the 21st Troop Carrier Squadron equipped with C-130s. Highly qualified aircrew were vital to the Tibet flights. These were made at night at low altitude and within the Himalayan mountains. To find remote drop zones, you needed navigational beacons, radios, and many other navigational skills. The typical flight would carry palletized cargo for drops, perhaps some Tibetans to be parachuted in that were engaged in training in Taiwan, and the CIA control parties of 4 officers each. Fortunately, emergency landing in India was also possible because of the large amount of CIA agents in the nearby Indian borderlands. The CIA's failure with the colonel's insurrection in Indonesia was a kind of like the alter ego, because everything that they did wrong there, supposedly they did well in Tibet. So that's gonna get us to a good stopping point. We're about mid-chapter. We'll be able to finish the chapter up tomorrow. So more crazy history.
Crazy, I'm telling you, it's nuts. And these people are evil. They need to be scattered to the wind.
Did we lose SR-71? I don't see him now.
Maybe.
Let me bring up Cousin Nita. She can come up. All right. So what's everybody got going on? How was everybody's weekend? Anybody want to ask any questions about the material? I see Guru. We haven't seen him since the new year. We need to check out how things are going with him. Trump Frog, how's it going? I see Stellar.
What's up? How are you?
Good.
I'm just working away, getting ready for the space tonight.
Awesome.
How was your weekend?
I had a fabulous weekend. The Bucks lost last night, so that sucked big time, but oh well.
That's what you get for having a midget quarterback. Just kidding. For the Bucks too. But you know, just like my football team, if your quarterback is under 5'10", you're gonna have big problems.
Yeah.
But either way, I was rooting for him too. I was heartbroken because your running back was an Oregon Duck, Bucky Irvin.
Well, Evans is kind of like my favorite current football player. I love him to death. Guy has a heart of gold, does a lot in the community over in Tampa. Just an amazing man.
Who's that?
Evans.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, praying for the people in California with the takeover of that state. It's ridiculous what's going on with all the things in the background. Creating a smart city, getting ready for the Olympics, wanting that property for that. There's way too much that's not being talked about. It's killing me.
Yeah, that's crazy. Stellar, go ahead.
I missed most of your space, sorry, but I wanted to give you guys an update. My mom thinks that the communists are going to take over Korea. That's what their propaganda is. You want me to give you a heads up on what she's hearing from over there. And then the demonstrations, I guess they're showing
You're fading out.
Trying to peacefully Koreans, I guess there's ones that are demonstrators in Seoul and stuff like that are for the president. And then there's a whole nother set of people, and she calls them communists, that want North Korea, and you want the unification, and everybody's waiting for Donald Trump.
Well, I hope that Korea eventually gets unification. Obviously, I don't hope that they're communists, but I do hope that they get a government that's not corrupt, which their current government. And honestly, there's very little about the stuff that we discover now that surprises me. But when we were doing Korea and I looked at all of their past presidents, I mean, almost without exception, they were all assassinated or arrested for corruption. Some while in office, some immediately after they were in office. It's shocking how corrupt South Korea is. While we're supposedly poking holes at North Korea, and we talked all about the Reverend Moon, the Unification Church, and just how really, really corrupt it is. But it's shocking that their presidents can't stay out of jail.
I'm wondering, do you think that the president that's in office right now, because I thought he was corrupt, because the ones that seem to be following him that are doing the peaceful stuff, apparently he's like held down in his house. It's almost like a house arrest or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That he's really wanting Donald Trump to get in because he feels, and so do these other people that are doing the demonstrations for him, seem to think that, I think that there's a lot of a lot of shiesty stuff going on. I think the CIA is very, very active there because they want the unification. They just don't want it under like the communistic thing. And then she says that, the ones that are backing the president is like literally under house arrest right now. She says that they're really pro Trump, and they're praying to God and praying that Trump will get in and help them become free. So I don't know it's so upside down, and I don't know. I just wanted to tell you that.
Yeah. So again, it is very hard sitting in America to be able to figure out who's the good guys and bad guys. Generally speaking, and I've not looked recently, but it did appear when it first started happening based on who was supporting him that he was a bad guy. And the best way to know who's the good guys and bad guys is who the State Department is supporting. Because if the State Department supports him, they're a bad guy. That's one of the best ways. If the National Endowment for Democracy or USAID supports them, they're a bad guy. Unfortunately, that's literally the truth. Also, another way of knowing is what actions are being taken by the ambassador, and frankly, who the ambassador is. You can tell if you have one of the ambassadors that are intimately involved in coups assigned to a country, there's a good guy in and he's getting ready to get thrown out. If you have an ambassador that's like the run-of-the-mill ambassadors that show up, like, previously had, I don't know, it's like a donation. So you know how a lot of the ambassadors are finance contributors to the president. And if you get one of them that is just a benign person, that that's not going to be a hot spot. They don't assign those people to regime change countries. They assign someone that looks exactly like a CIA operative to those. So that's kind of my cheat, if you will. Kathy, go ahead.
Hi, Colonel. I hope you can hear me okay. The sound has been really iffy on this site, and then I keep switching back between like Rumble and X to try to hear you better. But I think I'm just going to have to go back. I bookmarked it so I could listen to it from the very beginning. And this is probably stupid because you probably already talked about it, but I had to ask if you saw Alpha's little video that he just put out.
No.
It's the greatest news. The J6 case got dismissed.
I couldn't hear you. You cut out.
The J6 case, his J6 case got dismissed today.
That's
January 6th case got dismissed.
Yes.
No longer being under prosecution. That's awesome.
Yes. I'm like, I have to tell you because I'm like, oh, she probably knows, but I just
No.
I had to tell you, he made a little video and he said that he's gonna do Kyle Seraphin's show tomorrow, and he's like, you could tell he's like he's like trying to like not be excited that he's, just the way the world is just off his shoulders. The most amazing news. Anyway, I wanted to ask you if it's reasonable to assume, because the history that we learned about Tibet was so different in school. Just the movie 7 Years in Tibet is just completely different. Like, the monks were just, completely bullied and hurt, and they were just ransacked, and their temples were ransacked. They come out as a victim, and now it turns out that we were the ones that trained them and gave them tech. And I just wanted to ask, is it reasonable to assume that that's kind of where the Chinese started getting really techie, is from our intervention in that, the conflict we made up?
So I would not say that that's where they got techie. What I would say is that the local people, the monks in Tibet, are always going to be the losers. The CIA uses them, and whoever they're using them against, it's the same thing with the Contras. They're not good guys. The Contras were not good guys. They were corrupt. They use them to get rid of a elected president in Nicaragua in order to continue to use slave labor in Nicaragua. And in Tibet, you have their overall agenda was basically death by 1,000 cuts to China, because they want Chiang Kai-shek to be in charge of China. And they're going to try all along the border of China to insert him. Tibet happened to be one of them. And as you can see, the people of Tibet had been involved in smuggling for a very long time, both with Chiang Kai-shek, because you've got Indian opium on one side of you, you've got it going through to mainland China. So you have some corrupt people. Now, unfortunately, what happens is those corrupt people are going to be the ones, just like the Contras, that volunteer to go get paramilitary training and come back, and then they aggravate an already strategy of tension type setup with Tibet and China. And the attack from China's perspective on Tibet, I have no doubt that there were tons and tons of monks, and because they used all of those people in order to throw them at the PLA. So the PLA is going to come back and annihilate all the people that are being thrown at them. And in that course of action, the CIA, with their plausible deniability, sitting back and watching all of this happen, is either going to get a venue into China or they're not. And if they don't give a shit. They just go to the next country along the border, or because that's what they did in Korea. They killed, hundreds of thousands of people between Korea, Laos, I mean, millions if you bring in Cambodia, all along that. But if you just focused on North Vietnam, North Korea, and Tibet, you've got hundreds of thousands of people that ended up dead, all so that they could insert Chiang Kai-shek and his drug operation back into mainland China. And again, it didn't work, but they don't care. If it does work, great. If it doesn't, there's a bunch of dead bodies and their drug production keeps going. They just have to go somewhere to do it, somewhere else, get it from somewhere else. And that's the cold-blooded satanic evilness that makes up these people. And that's why whenever you have someone like, I'm going to start referring to her as no name, Sarah Adams, saying that the CIA isn't corrupt, it makes you want to vomit, because there's been millions of dead bodies to illustrate exactly how corrupt they are. So anyway, hopefully that helped. Benjamin, what's going on with you?
Mess around with all these kids as usual. Well, like, just to scale it out a little bit, like, just the fact that they have someone like that TPSA Sarah, whatever her name is, going on to shows like Sean Ryan, like, and then blatantly lying. Like, we have all this documented information showing, like, hey, history didn't go down like we were told, and you're still lying about it. And now you're putting more people in front of us and saying things like, if you challenge any of the narrative of 9/11, you're Al-Qaeda or you're a terrorist. It's like, what are you guys thinking? Like, this stuff is really important. Everything that we learned in history, has been subverted and skewed. That's why, like, this time's so important, like, who the right people it is to follow. And it's like, there's too many of them out there that have shown their hand. Like the Gavin Newsom video golfing was talking about earlier. Like, I watched that video where he was dancing around, and it's like, it broke my head, the fact that things that he's doing, and it's like nothing to him. Like, everything's already lining up. He looked like he's about ready to get a big payout, had everything all set up in order, like it was planned to burn this place down and then build it back in a different way. Like, it's money and it's evil, and that's the type of people that have been doing this stuff for decades that we see now, and none of them has been held accountable. So that lets you know right now that they're still calling some shots. So that's why what the message that the Colonel puts out is so important, because it gives people the opportunity to see the types of things that they do. And it's like, once you learn something, once you're aware of its existence, it's like a light shining when it happens. Like, oh, I know what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's getting easier and easier the more we learn to recognize patterns. Speaking of patterns, I don't see War Hamster in here, but I'm going to give him a shout out because he just sent me a couple minutes ago a exchange that he had. I can't tell by looking at the format of, he did a screenshot and sent to me of something that he posted on some social media. It doesn't look familiar to me, the background, so I don't know what it is. It's got arrows up and down, and I don't know what it is. I've never seen it before. But here's what he posted, I guess, to anybody. Reagan Iran-Contra should start the conversation. Not only was that illegal, but it was disastrous. Ending the Cold War was great, even if it was officially done under Bush 1. But what came out of it was utter chaos we're dealing with today. And then the spending is going to eventually end up bankrupting our nation. Bush Jr., forever wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq is a shithole ever since, and a breeding ground for terrorists. And it's the Iranian puppet, an Iranian puppet for the most part. Those are not strong records. And then this guy comes back and says, and you guys, everybody in here needs to pat themselves on the back, because your being here means this isn't us anymore, because this was us, by the way. Most of us anyway. Here's what he's responded. That's just a negative viewpoint about Republican foreign policy. Reagan ended the Cold War. Tear down this wall is somehow a problem, ? Ever visited Eastern Germany today? Iraq is quietly becoming a success story. Democracies don't war against democracies. And capitalism is the engine of growth, all lacking in the Middle East except Iraq. So, was South Korea a failure? ? Hardly. After we just talked about how many fucking presidents in South Korea that are corrupt as hell, this poor guy is freaking lost. All right, so War Hamster replies to him and says, it's a realistic viewpoint that suggests that the foreign policy complex, and he says state, CIA, military, industrial complex, have been the ones running the foreign policy since World War II, no matter whether there's a D or R in office. And they've done so for the benefit of multinational corporations, not for the country. We're an empire. We're not a democracy. And the U.S. will run roughshod over anyone that gets in that way, and has done such for 8 decades. Just in the past year, the U.S. has been involved in overthrowing governments, or at least interfering with Georgia, Congo, Belarus, Romania, Pakistan, Azerbaijan, Hungary, Poland, Syria, not to mention what's going on in Ukraine and Israel. Several of those quote unquote democracies, and the rest either have resources we want or are in the way of resources to extract. That's your foreign policy. And the only 3 presidents who have tried to stand up to that is JFK, Carter, and Trump. Somebody's paying attention, damn it. So anyway, I just think, I thank God that I found Bridget and Cousin It, and we've been on this journey together. I thank God that I found all of you guys that give me inspiration to get up and keep reading every morning. And I'm so glad we're not that guy anymore. We're not that guy. We know what's going on, and our knowledge is going to be shared one person at a time, until everybody understands what our true history is, and then collectively we change it. But we have to know what it is first.
Speaking of Bridget, I've been trying to pass her the mic, and I don't know if she's not able to pick it up or what's going on over there.
So I just did the co-host tour in as well. So we'll see if
I
she
think
can
she's
come
getting
up.
ready for National Popcorn Day.
National Popcorn Day. Yeah. All right. Anybody else got anything else? Nope.
Well, I do have one funny thing, and probably the reason why I just got kicked completely out of the space twice, and then would not even be. I mean, it was awful. I don't know if you saw J.P. Morgan CEO came out and said that the cryptocurrency was all the stuff that's used for human trafficking. And I managed to repost that above it because that's the same guy whose records were requested by the Virgin Islands in the Epstein case.
Yeah, is that Jamie Dimon?
I think so, yes.
Cool.
That sounds right. Yeah, I'm like, boy, if that isn't.
It's Bitcoin and FTX is what he's talking about. That's cryptocurrency is different than a digital asset because Jamie Dimon is buying digital assets to move their money.
I guess. Well, it's the same guy who apparently his records were requested during the Epstein trial in the Virgin Islands. So, nothing to see here. Yeah, nothing to see there, right? I guess he would know how they're using money or what type of currency they use for human trafficking if he's in the middle of it. Just saying.
Just saying.
Yeah, he was bankrolling Epstein.
Right? I mean, you just can't make this stuff up, you know?
Yeah, take it from me. They're using it for human trafficking. Because I did it. Not me, I'm talking for him. All right. So we've got, looking ahead this week, we've got the pond tonight at...
Colonel,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You have hands up. I don't know if you can see them. Molly
Okay.
and then Miles.
Okay. We've got the pond tonight at 8, and we've got the Wednesday night at 9:30. We've got the Alpha Warrior show. We've got noon on Thursday, the podcast with War Hamster, Continuing Secret Societies. And then 11:30 on Friday, Paul Williams, our second episode with him. So if you guys want to write those things down. Miles, go ahead.
Hi, Colonel.
Hi.
I've always been interested in word origins, where they come from, what do they mean. Are you familiar with bird language?
No.
Okay, so this is a process of learning what the words really mean and why do they pick the verbiage and the words, because it's not the average person, it's the guys that we're dealing with. So I'm kind of on a journey to decode a lot of their language, and they do it even in their names. They change their names. I don't know if they're making fun of us or laughing at us because we can't figure out the bird language. So I'll get back to you on that, but it's really interesting.
Okay. Molly, go ahead. Molly? Molly must be in the middle of something.
She's probably grabbed
That's my dog's name. She's sleeping.
Oh, I hope my audio is working and you can hear me.
I can hear you now, Molly.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Molly, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Molly, can you hear the Colonel, Molly?
Bridget, drop her down. I'll go to Benjamin and bring her back up. Please. Benjamin, go ahead.
Thank you. I was going to say bird language was one that I mentioned to you before. That's a big one. Symbolism, like things aren't always as they appear. You know, just interesting concept is like there's ways that they communicate with each other that's on the surface in plain sight. You know, for instance, take Lady Liberty. You know, where she's wearing a blindfold. That's a way of letting those in the know what's going on and who's calling the shots type thing. You know, there's different ways of signaling to your own that we rule over this area right here or over this realm. Like things are a lot more complicated. Bird language is very, very interesting. It gets into some of these old stories and songs that we learned while we were children, like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. You know, another one is London Bridge is falling down. You know, things are on the surface and below the surface. Like when we talk about satanic things and stuff, like there's a lot more to what is and what isn't than what's on the surface.
Okay, well, I know what that part of it is. I didn't know it was called bird language. Thank you for reminding me. Did we get Molly back up?
I've been throwing her the mic, but I guess he either can't or you know,
Okay.
isn't grabbing it. So
All right. Well, anybody else got anything?
Yeah, I got a question. What's on your bingo card between now and next Monday?
Terror. I do think that there's going to be something that happens between now and then. Some other, I would have thought, but I'm obviously not a forecaster. I don't have a crystal ball, nothing like that. But if you go back and you look, and as a matter of fact, I spent probably about 6 hours on Saturday combing through several of these books on elections that we've interfered with in foreign countries as to what exactly and how exactly we did that. One of the ways they do that is by finding a critical person that's going to have a critical role in the upcoming administration and assassinating them. They have done that repeatedly. So that was kind of what I was anticipating, at least an attempt to do something like that. You know, obviously I pray every night that these things do not happen, but that is something that they do. And then of course we already know, because they're already talking about it, that someone, if they don't work very quickly to put these people in jail, is going to try to release another bioweapon in the immediate aftermath of the presidency, or after the inauguration. So those are definitely on my bingo card. So we'll see. What's on yours, Trump Frog?
You know, I was thinking the same thing. I think they're going to try to do some random bioweapon. The other thing that I have on my bingo card that I think is going to happen is we're going to have an explosion of some kind of attack in one of the 17 cities that are on the list of attacks. I'm hoping it's not Las Vegas, obviously, but I think it's going to be one of the compliant Democrat states where we're going to have, you know, a shooting combined with, you know, something like the Louisiana style attack. And it could be the national championship game on January 20th.
You definitely get more, and I hate to say this, but you guys understand because I've used this term before. You get more bang for your buck at by doing these attacks in a democratically controlled area, because the people are more compliant to work with you to hide the stuff you want hidden and to reveal the stuff you want revealed. So another reason why you should, unless you absolutely have to, you should never live in one.
Well, you make a good point. Think about it. These are states that are blackmailed stealing an election, right? So Georgia is where the national championship is. It wouldn't surprise me if a state that all the leadership could be in trouble could happen. California's already happened. Nevada is high on the list because they stole an election. They literally told the people in the GOP not to support anybody but Trump or fight the election. So I went to a Clark County GOP meeting, and they were talking about that. And from top down, they were saying, don't support the candidates underneath Trump, right? Because they all want to keep it status quo. So I think it's going to be, just pick your liberal, like Arizona could be a good place where something like that would happen. But somewhere where they have stuff to cover up.
Well, the problem with Arizona, though, is a lot of the locals are not Democrat. You do have Tucson or something like that, but you really have to go to some place where the locals, not necessarily even like, Louisiana has a conservative governor, but the locals are corrupt, and they're the ones that are going to be controlling the information. So, obviously that's the reason why you have the stuff happen in Las Vegas, even, so I would think that it's going to be someplace like a, New York City or, the, Minneapolis, where you've got layer upon layer of corruption, at the local level, because you have to be able to hide most of the shit in compliant people, which is why they picked Atlanta as far as election. So those kinds of places, they just obviously go hand in hand with election cheating because they're all local Democrats. Philadelphia might be one, but anyway, who knows? I hope it doesn't happen. I pray it doesn't happen. And I pray that there are good people out there that are going to be aware enough at this point that they're going to ensure stuff like that doesn't happen. Miles, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm looking at the narrative seeding that they've done up to this point. So I think it may be a UAP incident, but on the lines of some of all fears, because both sides are putting that bird language out. Thanks.
Sure. Benjamin, go ahead.
Oh, wow. What do you mean by both sides are putting that bird language out, Miles?
Well, the UAP thing is something that has been either a lie or it's true, right? That's it.
That's profound.
So if it's been a lie and they've been using that to hide technology from us because they can't, that's one of their control mechanisms, so they make so much money. And if there's a group that wants to expose that, they could do it with a UAP because that is 0-point energy. So that's why I don't know if this is going to happen. Look, we're all guessing here, right? So, but the language has been put out there with gravitic drive. And I think that they want to go to a new technology era. And if they can expose it in a certain way, then that's their narrative. But the other guys, they want to hide that. They want to tell you that, yeah, some, attack from Mars or something, whatever.
Just real quick, that's very important because how the narrative, how it's written in the history books really does matter, because that's how these people are able to sneak back into the foliage and then come back later on. Like that's why I love this time and think it's so neat, because so many people are being forced to make moves. It's kind of cool.
They are definitely being forced to make moves. That's true. All along, go ahead.
Yeah, Colonel, on the general topic of, your local governments hooking in with the national CIA cover-up, I mean, I think that, it's useful to go back again to an earlier time, but we now have so much evidence about the three major league CIA domestic assassinations, JFK, MLK, and RFK, as to be really, to really illustrate that point in profound detail. Like, one of the things that irks me sort of is that a lot of people think, oh, I know that story, oh, I don't need to go and read any more about it because everybody knows that, let's move on. And yet, the nature of these things is to come out in kind of dribs and drabs over time, so that, like, a lot of people who, might last read about some of these things in the 90s would be just floored if they saw the incredible amount of, totally non-mediated new information that's come out. I mean, for example, we know about the, obviously, the Cabell mayor in Dallas. His brother was one of the top 3 dudes that JFK fired after Bay of Pigs. And of course, there's profound, obviously with Lyndon Johnson and whatnot, and there's a reason he was killed in Dallas. Far from accident. And also, in Los Angeles, the mayor of Los Angeles at the time of the RFK assassination on June 5th, 1968, he's like, whoa, you look into that guy, he is a curious animal. His name begins with a Y, and kind of Yorty, Sam Yorty. He is an enigma and a half, and it's only in the city of Long Angel could you find such a hardcore individual. And these, of course, LAPD, is directly running the RFK investigation with 2 literal CIA agents, Manny Pena and Hank Hernandez, who had both worked for CIA Office of Public Safety. To me, it's just, if we had a real left, the Democrats would be non-existent, because this figurative ammunition would be thrown at everybody in the country. But of course, we don't have a real left. We have CIA McLeftists. But the most recent example is, the MLK is coming up, and there's an amazing new book called The Deep State Assassination of Martin Luther King, which raises a lot of kind of reasons why it happened in Memphis. And, the governor of Tennessee he was, of all the Southern governors, closest to LBJ, among other things. And now this book, The Deep State Assassination of MLK, is written by a 6th-generation Tennessean, and his uncle actually ran the Bureau of Prisons for the state of Tennessee. So his uncle was fired by the governor for interviewing James Earl Ray, and continued to interview him after the governor told him not to. And the author of that book also has, he knows people throughout the state, so it's very informed because of him being a 6th-generation Tennessean with incredible amounts of local insight. So I would strongly recommend, that book, The Deep State Assassination of Martin Luther King.
Thanks. Okay. Bridget, you got anything?
Don't pretty much be at the pond, man. Be kicking around in the water.
Cousin It?
No, I'm just trying to figure out what's going on down in Venezuela, since my senator decided to up the ante for the bounty on Maduro. What an asshole. Honest to God.
Yeah,
They have not released the names of
the people.
the 2, the quote high ranking. And it's amazing that people don't get that they can't connect the 2 Colombians and the 3 Ukrainians along with them. It's like, really? You can't figure this out? And then if you tell them, they just have blinders on. They don't want to hear it.
Oh, Yeah. So I just keep coming back to the fact that I find it very interesting that we're supposed to believe our elections are great and we use the same systems that Venezuela uses, and theirs is absolutely 100% corrupt, according to the powers that be. So
Yeah.
it's like, come on, guys. But they do those types of things right in your face. That's supposedly like one of those struggle sessions where they're going to continue to yell in your face that the election systems that are in the United States are perfectly fine when the exact same ones are electing Maduro, but he's illegitimate. So, anyway, yeah, you just have to, that's one of those eye rollers. But I am very interested, and I'm actually shocked that Maduro has not said who those people are.
Yeah, I've been pretty much on the foreign channels all day because when did he arrest them? He got them on Friday, maybe?
I want to say it was Friday.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been really watching or I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I'm shocked that their faces are not on, and whatever names they were of IDs that they were carrying, because it's not the real ones, generally speaking. So we'll see. That is definitely something to keep tabs on. All right, guys. We don't have anything else. We're going to call it a day. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll be on the pond tonight, 8:15-ish. And I'll see you there. I've got some really crazy shit tonight. I came across another organization I'd never heard of. We're going to talk a little bit about it on the pond, and then I will dive a little bit deeper on Wednesday night with because I just discovered it this morning. I went, what the hell is this? And it's just doing these random searches based on keywords, but I'll save the rest of that until tonight. So anyway, see you guys then.
God bless y'all.
God bless you. All right. Now I can't see any of the comments because I'm on StreamYard. I'm sorry, guys. My Rumble channel would not let me look at anything. Let me go over there real fast and see if I can get back on. I had to go to StreamYard and just stream it over there because it wasn't letting me in my own little studio thing. So let me see if I can log on there real quick. There we are. It's let me on. Yes, you guys punch that like button. Give me a thumbs up. Definitely need that to get these videos out to farther reach. All right, so let's go over some of the comments here. Joining Possum Trap, joining a little late. X is so glitchy. I don't know what the heck that is. Did you hear Alpha got cleared? Obviously we did. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, I'm totally psyched about that. As a matter of fact, as soon as I get off here, I'm going to call him just to tell him I sent him a congratulations text. But Farm Girl and Friends, hello. Also, what else we got? Great show, still sound in and out. Yeah, I don't know what the deal is with Liz Crokin and James Wood. That's going to be like a what the hell? There's so much of this stuff that's just so crazy. Yes, Farm Girl, Chicago is definitely one of those that would be the double layer of corrupt protection. You're absolutely right. All right. Good to see you over here, Lady Pat, Tara, Renee, all of you guys. Thanks for being in here, Critter. Annie, and all of you. Thank you again for being here. I will see you guys tonight. If you can make it, 8:15 on the Frog on Spaces, and then back on our regular Spaces at 4. So, Danny with the dancing from. Love you guys. Take care.